In this video tutorial, you will explore and demonstrate the gradient tool, opacity settings as a blending mode, and how to build value using gradient plus opacity as an additive rendering tool. Our new tool is the gradient tool. That is G on the keyboard. Start by creating a new layer. Name this layer Picture Frames. Make frames the current layer. Using the magic wand tool, select one part of the frame at a time. Make sure Sample All Layers is checked. One way the gradient tool is constructed is by mixing the foreground and the background color on the main toolbar. Another way is to go to the gradient tool and then from your options panel, select a pre-mixed gradient tool, which is what we'll do for this exercise. Let's take a hyper pause here. Do your settings match mine? The way the gradient tool works is to pick and drag a line. The length of the line defines the overall gradient pattern. Let's take a hyper pause here while you watch me pick and drag a line out to define the gradient pattern. Once you have that part of the frame done, let's deselect, Control D on a PC, Command D on a Mac, reselect one of the styles of the frame, and repeat the gradient process. The horizontal bands of a frame are referred to as the rail. The vertical sides of the frame are the styles. This is the same with cabinetry and chair construction, etc. Get to know your vocabulary. Let's finish up the top frame of the elevation before we move on to the baseboards. Moving on, let's create a new layer for the baseboards. Go to the layer panel, pick new layer, and name this layer baseboards. Make the new layer the current layer. Magic wand tool to select the baseboards. Use the shift key to add to selections. Let's take a hyper pause here and look at our settings. Check your settings. Current tool, gradient, first gradient style, mode normal, opacity 50%. Begin the gradient tool by picking at the base of the selected area. Drag the gradient line up towards the top of the baseboard. Let's review what you've learned so far. The gradient tool at 100% opacity creates metallic effects, such as the example of the picture frames. Whereas when the gradient is set at 50%, this creates a more matte value change, like we saw on the baseboards. For the last part of this tutorial, let's look at creating value and depth by using the gradient tool, an opacity change, and a new blending mode, multiply. Let's begin by creating a new layer. Go to the layer panel, pick new layer. Let's name this Cabinet Interior. Hit OK. Make sure that the new layer is the current layer as depicted by the light gray band. I'm going to double pick on my foreground color on the main toolbar. This brings up a color picker, and I can move through the entire color wheel spectrum here by using the slider. I'm going to try to find a green that I think is a nice mid-century green color. Okay, we want to mix this color with white to show depth. In addition, we want to select this entire part of the inside of the cabinet. And I'm holding the Shift key down to add to all the parts. Now that I'm done selecting, I'll move to the gradient tool. Let's take a hyper pause here to check our settings on the options panel. I will make sure that it looks like the color I selected mixed with white. I want the first gradient pattern, and here, instead of the normal mode, this time we're going to select multiply. And we're going to set the opacity to 40%. This is a process that is much like working with transparent markers. I am going to pick from the corner my gradient line and drag in a downward diagonal line. I'll do the same thing from the lower left-hand corner. The longer I make the line, the more it extends the first color, which is the foreground color here. And I can keep building on this color if I want by going over it. It adds a 50% semi-opaque wash of color each time that I pick and drag a line. Command D on a Mac, Control D on a PC deselects. Now, one thing I want to be able to do is get inside these jug handles and add a little bit extra color effects. So I'm going to momentarily turn off the eye of my current layer. I'll use my magic wand just to select the inside of the jug handles. I will then turn back on my eye, go back to the gradient tool, which is G on my keyboard, and add just a little bit more depth of color. Okay, I'm satisfied with that, and I'll repeat the process on the top layer. Using the magic wand, I'll select all the small parts of this area, and then I will zoom in and get the rest of the parts. And I'm holding down my Shift key to add to those parts. Going back to the gradient tool, which is G on the keyboard, I will pick and drag a diagonal line out from each corner of the selected area. And since I think it might be a little darker on the top than the bottom, I'll try to make it a little bit darker there. Command D on a Mac, Control D on a PC, deselects. And that's it. I will trust you to do the metal gradients of the jacks on your own.